Hi, River Room. I think we don't have very many folks here tonight. I'm just checking
Yeah,
our
I know
list.
Maya said she couldn't make it tonight.
So yeah, this is all of us. Okay. And we are going to get a flow person and a subject matter expert in just a moment for you to ask questions. Is there any anything you want to air prior to that?
So it's really three options that are presented, right? 4, 3.
Yes. There's 3, but we're assuming there are caveats. So we're assuming, are you okay with this? And the recommendation would be written with the caveats that you have.
Yeah, I mean, if there's like this presented in map or feeder form or something, I'm terrible at engaging with this stuff, like just looking at a slide. So if there's a thing to share, that would be helpful.
I'm asking if we can have.
Hello.
There we go.
I apologize. And then Megan's was having bad connections. Okay. So I just want to preface all of this. I know people are like, where's the info? Where is it shared? This is literally stuff that we've been like kind of spitballing in potentially anticipation of going one direction or another. We don't want to presume what the direction of the SEGC is going to be. So there is still things that are drafts in here for sure. And just wanted to be able to talk about the different ways that boundaries may help with the issues that you guys have all been struggling with Harrison Park and Kellogg in one issue, and then in particular Lane and Selwood. So let me get everything together really quick.
Can I ask a clarifying question just about Woodstock and what we're looking at? So in this, because there's E's, E1 and E2. So in this, does Woodstock still have a Mandarin strand?
Yes.
So the Mandarin strand would go to, in this scenario, for that option 1, the Mandarin strand at Woodstock would go to Harrison Park, and then the neighborhood strand would go to Lane. Is that right? And that first option you guys were just talking about in the boundary split.
In E1, no, the boundaries are not Woodstock in where we're going with things potentially. If the Harrison Park is Chinese DLI and Kellogg is Spanish DLI, Woodstock would continue to go to Harrison Park. One of the options here in looking at Woodstock is to potentially change Woodstock's feeder to Lane to help increase enrollment in Lane.
Yeah, that's what I was curious. So it would still then, in essence, be a split in either scenario, right?
I think it would be
because you're going to 2 separate middle schools in either scenario, because your immersion program is going to Harrison Park.
right.
Lane. So in essence,
Right.
they're both having students splitting to 2 schools.
Correct, because Lane doesn't have a Chinese DLI. Can I just want to share one slide that Jed didn't, just to get this out in the open here. Slideshow, present, share screen. There were several boundary changes that were discussed early on that we just wanted to make sure that we talked about, that were rolled back. That had come up, we kind of peripherally talked about boundary changes a number of times. And so just want to make sure that there was this area over here to the east of Marysville. And I can show these on a map, but just want to, in case anyone had conversations about it, specifically that was back at Marysville. This Atkinson to Creston, there had been discussion about this little corner that it's kind of that compactness, making it more compact wasn't necessarily the best way. Plus it was also decreasing enrollment in Creston, and we still need to think about the other schools involved. So that was a shift back in everything we're looking at, because we got a lot of feedback about that. There was discussion about some of the, so Woodstock's up here, and there was a part that went from, excuse me, Lewis to Woodstock. That's kind of in that main Woodstock corridor where a lot of the shops and things are that does have some safer crossings. I used to live right there, so I understand that there are a lot of crosswalks, but decreasing that extent and splitting it on, I don't know what street this is specifically, but we can look at it closer, but just minimizing that extent to maintain some students in Lewis. That was a conversation that was had as well. So we've looked at like only taking, I think 2 blocks down. I think it's like not Henry, can't remember the specific street.
Carlton.
Carlton, thank you. Thank you, Micah. Yep, Carlton. So making it like within 2 blocks past Woodstock, putting that back into Lewis, and then an additional area to the west of Lane, going back to, that was proposed to go to Whitman, so keeping it in Whitman. So I just want to, these are global changes that collectively we heard on a number of occasions that we just went ahead and implemented. So Jed didn't actually cover that. So I just want to acknowledge that right now is sort of the starting point for new boundaries. Okay, stop sharing that. And let me pull up a couple other things. And share again. Okay, so I also just want to make sure that we are understanding that we're still just here. We're talking conceptually, right? Like these are ways that we can move the numbers for all of the middle schools by looking at some changes either to the feeder systems or the elementary school boundaries. This is because we've heard a lot in our conversations about having some at 700, some at 500. And so these are just things we've been looking at in advance because we only have 1 more, maybe 2 meetings to discuss this. So what I just want to focus your attention to is kind of this area around here. Okay, because we're going to see some shifts between Arleta and Marysville. We mentioned the Foster area. We're going to see some shifts between Lewis and Lane, with Lewis feeding all the way back into Selwood. And we're going to see some shifts with Woodstock feeding into Lane. So I just kind of want to click through these, but allowing you to focus your eye on where the changes are happening. So in this one, this is where Lewis would be split between Lane and Selwood. So right down here, I think it's at 42nd, Jed mentioned. 45th, thank you, Micah. 45th, so putting half into Selwood, half into Lane. So that's one of the changes here. So Lewis would be split. It also is looking at this Marysville Arleta split with putting Marysville into Arleta south of Foster. And that was a lot of the conversations based around crossing busy roads, that safety, walkability aspects. You're going to see this change throughout this entire series that we're calling F. Okay, so that's F1. So now we'll look at F2. So here we have Arleta feeding into Lane. We have the Marysville change, Marysville going to Arleta. And then we have a lesser split Lewis feeds completely into Selwood, but then this area down here still changes at the elementary and middle school level. Remember those like cross hashings mean it's an elementary change and a middle school change. So this is just another way to continue to bolster enrollment at Lane, not Lent, at Lane, but also not take so much out of Selwood, because we heard that as well. Arleta here is then split between Kellogg, north of Foster, and Lane, south of Foster. Let's to go away to get to my next one. Move this.
Are there any questions about that one before we move on?
I would like to just kind of show all three for the contrast.
Yeah, that'd be helpful to go through all three.
And we still, I mean, if I were to show you the summary stats, they're not formatted. Like we are doing this right now. So
We probably have about 5-ish minutes, maybe 10 for
5 minutes. Right. So, okay, just kind of, so now just flipping back. So we looked at this one with Woodstock still going to Hosford, some changes between Marysville and Arleta, Lewis being split. This one has Arleta being split, going to Lane, still that change in Marysville, a little bit of a different change over here for Lewis and Selwood. And then the third option has Arleta all feeding into Kellogg, and no splits, but Woodstock then feeding into Lane. That's the main difference. And if we wanted to look quickly at the numbers, and again, this is unformatted. Can you see the table when I'm sharing my screen?
Yeah.
On this, okay, great. Sometimes it doesn't. We just want to focus on the middle schools here, between Harrison Park, Hosford, Kellogg, and Lane. Harrison Park is still remaining about the same, so we're not really doing a lot to Harrison Park in this. Kellogg is still around 700. Lane comes up a little bit from the other ones, and Selwood as well. F2, this is where we're seeing a little like Kellogg come down to be about the same as Harrison Park. You want to scroll down and make sure we're including all of them, Mount Tabor and Selwood as well. And again, apologies, this is draft. We're just trying to get your heads thinking about some stuff before you get the information. F3, again, Kellogg is still, F2 is really the only one where Kellogg enrollment is impacted. The other ones are really focusing on more Lane and Selwood. So with that super fast overview, are there any questions before we go back into the big group that can help before you guys get some of this information in a better formatted way that you're used to seeing?
Was there a third option or just the two?
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I not do?
Oh, I thought we only saw two, but that could be.
1, 2, 3. Yep.
I had a question about Lane and the feeders. Would one of these negatively impact like their title funding more than the others?
I'm not able to answer that question right now. We haven't had a chance yet to get the direct certification info from the district. I would think that most of these are going to like try to increase enrollment at Lane. So I'm not sure. I don't feel that I can accurately answer that question at this point with the information that we have. But we'll get those direct certification numbers before we send any information out to you. I don't know who had their hands up first. I don't know.
Sorry, I'm taking notes. I wasn't watching either. I think
Okay.
it's like,
Let's see. Beth hasn't said anything yet. We'll go with Beth.
I think Mike goes first.
I think
so
Mike was
I'll
too.
yield to him.
It's Micah, Kathy, Beth.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Beth.
I just had a question on what it does to the overall target enrollment for the elementary schools in that area, because we're adjusting the middle schools, but I don't know where the elementary schools are headed.
Yep, they're all in here in an unformatted table at a in a conversation, and I'll be totally honest with y'all, in a conversation that Ethan, Jed, and I had about an hour before this meeting tonight, we were like, F2 looks that it has like kind of the most balancing across everything. But we'll get the information out in the way that you're used to looking at it. These tables are really unformatted. So I mean, we have to go through and be like, okay, here's Abernathy's total, Arleta's total. So you guys will be able to look at that once we get everything put together. You know, and I just do want to say, we didn't want to put a bunch of stuff out if the discussion had gone in a different direction earlier. We were also looking at options for that path. So this is really just us trying to get ahead of where the conversations are going, so we can get stuff to you as quickly as possible, so you have time to process it before the next meeting. Okay, Kathy?
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and I appreciate that. I'm hopefully looking forward to seeing something. The real question that kept coming to me was Harrison Park and getting that more funded. And is there any way to do that, or more students with boundary changes? I'm comfortable with the idea of splitting. I think we heard sometime before that like a middle school transition that's an okay to go to two different middle schools from the elementary. But I'm curious about why going back to moving more Marysville into Arleta, couldn't they just both be a split to Lane? And why there's like two switches, then switch the elementary school and then switch to a new middle school.
Yes, I think the issue with the Marysville is this area up here coming from Bridger, part of it going to Arleta and part of it going to Marysville would create, you know, and then this area moving into Arleta, it would create a really funky boundary for Marysville. So this is where that kind of like compactness and trying to make it so it doesn't just kind of snake through neighborhoods and become a, like one side of the street goes one and the other. I think that we were trying to, well, I know we were trying to limit the number of schools that were split going different places, but those are definitely things that can be explored.
Okay, yeah, but I do think that idea of more Marysville and Arleta students going to Lane would help with that direct certification numbers being closer to keep the Title I. I think that's probably a good, might be a benefit when we have a chance to look at that closely. I'm just imagining that will help that.
Yeah, so this one is Arleta. If this section of Marysville goes to Arleta, then we're not having a split at Marysville as well. It's just Arleta. Arleta is the split that goes between Kellogg.
Yeah, I think it's just tricky where Marysville is located right on top of Foster. Similar to what has happened at Lewis when you move that, like you can look at the, you know, and there's nice crosswalks already built there. So it's frustrating for the families who are like, I'm literally 2 blocks away from a school and now I travel.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Micah?
I actually have one question before now. I think I'll look at the numbers for my first question first before I dive into that. For the second one, I'm still baffled for that little section on that Northern Lewis area.
To Selwyn.
Yeah, and the numbers can't, and I know before it was a block, it was 2 blocks south, and you guys
Mhm.
made it 2 blocks, and before it was 35 elementary kids that's going to swap, and now it's even less. I mean, how important is that? I mean, it's like I said, the cleaner would just be like Woodstock.
Yeah, I think
Right.
it's because of this shift into Marysville and the Bridger into Marysville, Arleta into Marysville, Arleta into Woodstock. Then there's a very cascading effect of boundary changes that when you start making one, sometimes it's clockwise, sometimes it's counterclockwise, but there's these shifts that just try to make things so that one school isn't over or under enrolled. And with this area going from Woodstock to Woodmere, you're taking away from Woodstock, you're adding in some over here. So it's just a balancing act. That isn't something that obviously has to stay, especially if it's like 35 students.
Well, it's even less now, right? And my thing is, if you go along Woodstock, there are a lot of multi-units being built
Mhm.
on Woodstock currently, like a lot. So I think eventually the Woodstock numbers will go up if you take everyone on Woodstock Boulevard going to Woodstock Elementary for neighborhood.
Right. So I would assume if we're looking at Woodstock, it's sitting at 500 in the forecast under F2, under F1. So I think it's to get it to be around that 500 number. And like I said, there's just a cascading effect that sometimes happens. So these are the things that we'd want to explore a little farther.
Right.
We want to give you some place to start rather than say, figure out all the areas. And
Sure.
that seemed like an area where there's some crosswalks. I can only see like 4 people. In
We have
this area.
Kathy and Andy with hands raised. Do we want to go Andy first?
Okay. Thank you.
I don't have a question. I guess I'll share reaction. I don't know if F3 looks any different. I'm putting my South Tabor hat on since I get I hear, as someone who lives in South Tabor, I hear a lot from my neighbors in South Tabor, and I know there's a lot of concern about this Woodward line coming back and kind of splitting the neighborhood in a really arbitrary sort of way. And I know it gets tricky because we're trying to put Kellogg in its own boundary, and we have pretty much all the rest of the neighborhood not going to Kellogg, which is something else I hear a lot about, right? But I guess I just wanted to name that it really is, the area that we're splitting here really is a neighborhood that is getting split arbitrarily. And the history of that Woodward line apparently is pretty redlining as well, but I mean, not that that's the biggest concern, but just wanted to know. I'm talking about the Kellogg, the split right there at Woodward.
Yeah. And I think that, and I totally hear what you're saying. I think that is about having a contiguous boundary for the pathway
Right.
to Harrison Park, because
The Atkinson shift makes it tough, I know.
Yeah. So that's
it is a pretty weird situation for that neighborhood specifically, though, because you have like nobody in the neighborhood going to the middle school right in the neighborhood, and then the weird line is sending a few kids to Kellogg, but then they're going to an elementary school that's way further south.
Right. Yeah, it's a unique boundary. I mean, I have seen discontiguous boundaries in other districts just because the school has been built at a different time, and it's just like, well, this area will feed to here. It's about making a contiguous boundary, because if you didn't make it contiguous, you would basically look like you were driving by Kellogg.
Yeah.
If that area was in Kellogg, you'd be hopping over an attendance area.
Yeah. Well, then I was wondering how many kids are there, like it didn't make the whole thing down to Powell. Well, I guess then you have it weird where it's not in its boundary, but I mean, that actually in a weird way almost makes more sense than what we have here. But anyway,
And
I know we're not really talking feedback.
I'm wondering if I think Andrea had her hand up, if
Yeah.
we even could get 20 seconds from her.
20 seconds.
45.
I just want to just feeling like Arleta switching middle schools potentially again after switching in the first round, or like that change happening, just feels hard to ask the same students to switch, make another change in a year. I just want to name that.
Thank you.
thank you, Beth. 2 seconds. Bye.